Hola mis amigas, Cara Nuevo. Welcome back to Careena's Adventures. Welcome to the first video in a three-part video series about the 3 acts of a story. First off, Act 1. What it should include, what it is, and how to make it engaging so that your audience won't put the book down. So the Act 1 is basically everything from the beginning of the story, including the prologue if there is one, to the kind of adventure begins, if you will, just post-inciting incident, build up for lack of a better word. Make sure to include the pre-incident life of the main character. What was the status quo of their life before the inciting incident comes along? Preliminary world building is also a good idea if you are doing a story that requires world building, just enough so that way we can kind of get an idea of what the main character's world is like, as is currently important and necessary for us to understand the story and their internal conflict. So this brings us to the inciting incident, which basically is the first big point of conflict in the story. It's the first main hurdle that the main character faces, and ultimately it's going to challenge them in their false belief and give them the choice, the first chance to kind of overcome it, even if it's in a way where they're not going to truly overcome their false belief yet, they're not going to truly realize their false belief yet, but it should still be something where the main character has to decide, am I going to stop, am I going to continue, and ultimately, of course, they have to decide to continue and move forward, whatever that looks like in your story, so that your story can progress into Act 2. So I normally avoid using examples from film and literature in my videos, but I think in this case it'll really help you to understand how a 3-act structure is set up and what it looks like. So for my example, I'm going to be using Finding Dory. If you haven't seen the movie, there are massive spoiler alerts coming and will be coming throughout the series because I'm basically going to be breaking down all of the major plot points. So if you haven't seen it and you would like to see it, you should probably go watch it and then come back and watch this video. But anyway, we'll start from the very beginning because after all, this is Act 1. So in Finding Dory, the movie opens with Dory as a child. You get a glimpse of her with her family, and you get a glimpse into her internal conflict, her insecurity about her short-term memory loss. So the first 5 or 10 minutes or so is kind of telling the backstory, but it's very succinct and to the point, and doesn't give you so much information that, you're like, when's the movie going to start? But it gives you just enough information to keep it mysterious, which I know is something that they deliberately did, and also gives you just enough information to kind of understand what happened, enough to know what you need to know going into the rest of the movie. The backstory, kind of prologue, ultimately concludes with a flashback from the first movie, Finding Nemo, where you get reminded about how Dory met Marlin and how they went and found Nemo, but it's very quick, succinct, and to the point, and ultimately brings us to where they show us the status quo of Dory's life, living with Marlin and Nemo, and, interacting with Nemo as he goes to school, and things like that. The inciting incident is when Dory remembers her parents. Now, this brings up so much in the main character, which the inciting incident really should. It should kind of bring them head on with their internal conflict, and at the same time kind of have to overcome it, but they won't completely overcome it until obviously later in the story, kind of with the climax and everything. So, when Dory remembers her parents, it resurfaces that insecurity she feels about her short-term memory loss, but also at the same time kind of motivates her because she wants to go and find them, and kind of gives her a little bit of confidence in that sense, almost more motivation than confidence, so that she can, go across the ocean and find her parents. But obviously at this point in the story, she's still doing it with Marlin and Nemo. Ultimately, by the end of the story, we'll see her kind of being motivated and going forward on her own without necessarily help from anyone else. Not that help from other people is a bad thing, but it is a specific kind of shows you where her character arc is in this particular instance. But that is for the Act 3 video, which, you know, will be coming out in a couple weeks, so subscribe and stay tuned and all that. So basically, Act 1 of Finding Dory ends with them setting off to cross the ocean. It's kind of the adventure begins kind of a thing. Now, keep in mind that even though this is a lot of information, it happens over a fairly short period of time and is very clear and succinct. Basically, this brings us to the do's and don'ts and ways to make your Act 1 more engaging and not have it fall flat so that the reader will put it down before they are done, you know, reading the book. Don't write a long exposition of backstory or world building that is currently insignificant. If it doesn't contribute to the reader's immediate understanding of the main character and their internal conflict, or something that they need to know in order to understand, you know, the rest of what's going to happen kind of in this Act 1 or other essential information. Unless it's essential information, don't just go into exposition and world building because it's fun, because, you know, it can be fun. Also, don't wait too long to get to the inciting incident. The inciting incident probably won't happen immediately in your story. That's kind of what the hook is for, but it should happen fairly upfront and fairly quickly. Otherwise, your readers will be turned off and they'll be like, what's the point? When are we going to kind of start the adventure, start the action here? And they'll put the book down. Do make us care about the character. Now, obviously, to do this, you have to know your character, know what their internal conflict is, because as the reader, caring about the character's internal conflict is ultimately what's going to make them care about the story and want to keep reading to know how this character is going to overcome their problem both on the inside and on the outside. Lastly, do include or mention the people that have shaped the main character's life or are important to the main character. Things that you want to think about are family, mentors, anyone and everyone that has influenced how the main character looks at the world and their current situation in that world. Obviously, you don't have to mention every best friend's friend and every second cousin's fourth cousin, okay? You know, you don't have to mention literally absolutely everyone. But if there is a person that influences either their situation or how they look at the world, then you want to include that person, whether it's family or, you know, if they're of royalty, who's their mentors and counselors, if they're in a poor village, who in the village have they gotten to know the most, who in the village is closest to their family, if that affects the story. It's just whatever is necessary for your story and for your character in particular. So I hope that this was helpful. At the heart of Act 1 is really hooking into your main character's false belief and internal conflict and giving your audience a taste so that they really want to see how that internal conflict and false belief is resolved. You want to do some foreshadowing of the external conflict too, but what ultimately makes the external conflict relevant is how it relates to what's going on inside your main character. And if you succeed, which if you build that engagement with the internal conflict, you really should succeed, then your audience will stick with that story through the inciting incident and ultimately be propelled into the Act 2, which will of course be next week's video with more spoiler alerts from Finding Dory. Thank you for watching this video. Please do follow me on Instagram and Pinterest at Careena's Adventures and subscribe so that you get to see the next videos in this series as they come out. Adios mis amigas y Dios le bendiga. Have a blessed day and happy writing.